Hi, I'm Brent Farley. I'm the managing member of Farley Law. And today I want to take a little departure from our usual topics and talk about the Olympics because why not? The Olympics are fun. So this year I watched an event that I watched last time around for the first time and enjoy watching this time, and that's the speed climbing. Now, this is a sport where two athletes at a time will try to climb a 50-foot wall as fast as they can and try to beat their opponent up the wall. It's pretty amazing because the wall is about 50 feet tall. It has big red holes. However, the holes, if you've ever tried to climb it, are really not that great for most angles. They're a little hard to hold on to. And to pile on top of that, the wall isn't vertical. It's actually tilted back about 5 degrees. So if you stand under it and look up, by the time you get to the top, you've actually moved back from where you started. And so watch somebody tackle this wall and climb it in under 5 seconds is pretty darn amazing. And if you take a close look at what they're doing, you'll see that they skip holds, they jump, and they cover quite a lot of territory very quickly. It's really amazing to watch. So I enjoy rock climbing. I've started into it in the past few years. And while I'm not nearly as good as some of those folks who climb at the Olympics and probably never will be, I really enjoy the sport in learning it. So one of the things I've discovered about rock climbing is that it's very technique intensive. If you understand the technique and you employ it properly, it makes climbing a lot easier than it otherwise would be. So over time, I've been able to go from kind of scrambling and struggling to climb to being able to move into harder and more difficult climbs and have an easier time with them. So what does this have to do with banking and finance and law? Well, today I want to talk a little bit about techniques to use in banking and fintech partnerships. So right now, in a continuation of the past number of years' trends, we've seen a lot of efforts from fintech organizations and banks to put together partnerships to try to find new ways to offer financial services and also to offer some novel services and products that we haven't seen before. And so just like with rock climbing in the financial services industry, when you're looking at partnering with banks and other financial services firms, there are some key techniques to employ that really make things a lot easier and make your services and the way you provide them a lot more effective. So let's talk about a few of those. And so the first one, this may seem obvious to start, but there's a lot to think about with it. The first one is really just division of responsibilities. So if you're going to work together, you're a bank, you're working with another firm, or you're a fintech firm, you're looking at working with a bank, you're going to have to decide who does what. And that seems like an easy question at first, but when you really dig into the detail, there's a lot of detail and information to cover. So you want to think about licensing requirements. If the fintech firm takes on certain activities, it's going to need to take on state and or federal licenses in order to offer those services in the United States or in a particular state. Whereas if the bank takes on many of those types of activities, the bank already has a banking charter that permits it to offer numerous financial services and financial activities in a number of states without pursuing numerous state licenses. You might think, oh, it's just a license. But if you're a fintech firm and you're staring down 10, 15, 20, 30, or 50 different licenses to obtain and to maintain, the expense and time commitment for obtaining those and maintaining those is pretty large. It is pretty significant and can be a task all by itself to tackle. And so when you're looking at dividing up responsibilities, it's important to think about which activities does the bank need to tackle, which activities is the fintech organization or the financial services organization better suited to handle without needing to dive into licensing. Software. A lot of times, a fintech firm has greater software development capacity than the bank. And so it makes a lot of sense for the fintech firm to tackle the development piece. And that may seem really sensible on its face, but there's more to it than that. If you really dig into the encryption needs, the privacy needs, kind of the division of where data is held and delivered to various people, it gets to be very complicated. And if you pile the SOC type audits on top of that, it becomes pretty expensive and pretty difficult to handle. And so a lot of times we'll see banks push a technology piece off onto a separate financial services provider who might be better at handling that. And then there are some activities that probably ought to be handled jointly. I think we've seen in the news that things like reconciliation and reporting and transaction structuring, you might have one of the entities handle that primarily, but you need a great deal of visibility from both sides and in order to be able to manage reconciliation and transaction processing services effectively and make sure they're being done properly. So that's division of responsibilities. And if you're looking at engaging in a bank fintech partnership, I encourage you to take your time, make sure you pencil out who's doing what and at what point in the customer acquisition and service delivery process, and make sure you've thought through, at least at a high level and to some extent on a process and policy level, what those things are going to look like for both groups. So moving on, the next thing we want to talk about is oversight. And so if you're going to build out a process, you're going to build out division of responsibilities, you're going to want to build in mechanisms for each partner to make sure that things are happening appropriately on the other side. And that can be difficult sometimes. And so you want to give some thought into how you're going to manage reporting, who's going to do what, who's going to have accountability for different options. Next thing we see come up a lot is licensing for trademarks and licensing for software. So we have some development of software going on. We'll have some branding going on usually because we're often involving a new product or service. So who owns the brand? Who owns the software? Who's building the software? And who ends up owning this apparatus or pieces of it in a way that makes sense for both of the parties? And so it's important to sit down and think about, okay, who's handling marketing, who's building the brand, who gets the brand, who keeps the baby after it's built, from both a software and a trademark perspective. And those are important things to consider. And we've seen various scenarios, and sometimes it's important for the bank to keep one or both of those items, and sometimes it's important for the fintech to keep one or both of those items. And it is heavily circumstantial, and that's something that needs to be covered and put in paper, because down the road it'll be important to document that and make sure that the partnership is handled consistent with that arrangement to start with. Next thing, ongoing monitoring enforcement. And if you're going to set a policy, you're going to set a procedure, you're going to set up a methodology for reporting, well, follow it. You have to take the partnership agreements and the flow charts and all of the penciling into the process, and you actually have to follow it and make sure that it happens appropriately. And so somebody needs to be in charge to make sure that these things happen. Staff need to be appropriately trained to follow processes. You need to follow up with people, make sure that what's in an agreement and what's in the plan is actually executed. Make sure that agreements allow both parties enough leeway to be able to kind of check in and make sure that all of those things are actually happening. Next thing, exit planning. We like to think about exit planning really, because if you're going into an agreement, you're thinking about it enduring for a long time, and if things are done right, it can. But circumstances arise that are unforeseen, and oftentimes it's important to exit. And sometimes the partnership will fail. So you need to think about what happens when we need to unwind or transition. How do we take customer relationships and transition them to another bank if that's what needs to happen? How do we close out accounts if that's what needs to happen? If we have loans or agreements with customers that require services over a duration of time, I need to make provision to make sure that those services are actually delivered to customers, even though the agreement between the bank and the fintech partner may not be ideal anymore. And so contingency planning, exit planning, thinking about what happens when X happens, disaster planning, all those things are important to think about when you're getting started. And, we start with unforeseen circumstances. A lot of times circumstances really are unforeseen. But if you do prepare for what you can foresee adequately, a lot of times you have enough to adjust to the unforeseen circumstances and can deal with them appropriately. Last thing, regulatory response. So the financial services world is evolving. So is financial services regulation. It changes, it adjusts, it continuously changes and adjusts. And so over time, the arrangement will need to be responsive to adaptations and to changes in bank regulations and financial services regulation. And that can sometimes mean some renegotiation, some reformatting of the structure and partnership agreement, and your agreements and your relationship with your fintech, your bank partner need to be good enough that you can manage those adaptations and changes as they come up. So that's a quick summary of a few things to think about, a few techniques to put into place that will make a bank and fintech partnership much more effective and will make management of the arrangement much easier, as opposed to just trying to scramble through things and figure out things on the fly. It'll be much more effective and I think much more profitable if those things are tackled up front. I'm Brent Farley with Farley Law. We help banks and financial services entities build and develop new products and services and help them launch them in a healthy and profitable way. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to speak with you, whether it's just questions about how do I get started, or I have this idea that I'd like to run past you. We take those all the time. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.